Well, good morning and welcome back. Today's video, we're going to look at the router table and some router table basics, mainly for your safety. And the reason that I'm going to address this today is that I've been watching some YouTube woodworkers last month or so, and I was really surprised at some of the unsafe practices that I saw some woodworkers doing on the router table. Be it because they had confidence in their skills, I can understand that, or whether it was they just didn't know, or whatever the reason. But they were doing some things that could eventually, they're going to get somebody hurt, and it's concerning to me. So I want to at least bring up some basics to the router table and maybe prevent somebody from getting hurt, especially some newbies. And even woodworkers that have been woodworking a long time, there's a lot of shops that do not have router tables. And we use a router standing up all the time, and it's kind of intuitive there, but you flip it upside down, and that's basically what we've done. We've turned a router upside down, and now we're feeding stock into a router instead of a router into stock. Some of the things that we're going to talk about today, router table basics, remember, is going to be the bit installation, and going to be the bit size versus the bit speeds. Most routers are variable speed that are in a router table. If it's not, you need to know that and know that certain bits aren't safe if your router is a fixed speed router. Then we're going to look at the direction that the bit turns in a router table, the bit rotation direction. We're going to look at the feed direction. How should we feed stock into the bit that's rotating at 24 to 27,000 RPMs. And then the last thing we're going to look at is miter tracks on a router table. A lot of them come with them. Mine doesn't even have one. And I'll explain why when we get there. So that's what we want to talk about today. And so thanks for watching, and stay tuned. We'll get started.
First thing we'll talk about this morning is the bit installation, the proper way to install a router bit.
And the bit's held just simply by a collet that screws into the router. Most routers come with both a 1/4 inch collet and a 1/2 inch collet, and that is simply the diameter of the shank of the router bit. 1/4 inch diameter shank, 1/2 inch diameter shank. We're going to use the 1/4 inch shank today. So one of the first things you want to do is, first of all, get it down in the router bit itself where the collet screws onto. Want to make sure that there's not dust or dirt down in here. What happens is the router bit, let me zoom out here a little. The router bit sits in this collet, and then you tighten it up, and as you tighten it up, this collet squeezes it and basically holds it in place. So you don't want it to be dusty and dirty, and over time dust and sawdust will get in there. It's a good thing occasionally to clean that out. After you've got it clean, screw your collet on until just when it starts to tighten. There, and back it up. Then you want to drop your bit in. There, it's bottomed out. That's not where you want to tighten it. You want to back it up about 1/16 of an inch. Back it up about 1/16 of an inch, and then hand tighten. And then you can tighten your chuck up. When it bottoms out, if you tighten it up with it bottomed out, I have had the bit, remember it's going to be spinning close to 20 to 25 24 to 27,000 RPMs. If it's bottomed out, I don't know why, but it will have a tendency to work up. And I was routing grooves one day in a bookcase rail and style, and it was flutes actually. I was routing flutes in a rail and style, and all of a sudden my flutes got deeper and deeper and deeper, and it ruined some expensive mahogany that I was using. So when you put your router bit in, don't bottom it out. Put it in and raise it up ever so slightly. Some guys use O-rings. You can buy O-rings at Harbor Freight in a little kit. And I know some guys put an O-ring in the bottom of their collet to keep the bit from bottoming out. That works well. I've never done it, but it works well. So once your bit is in, you lower your router bit so you can put your plate back in. There. Then you set your bit height, and then we're ready to go.
Our next topic for our router table basics discussion this morning is going to be the bit size versus the speed for which it would turn. You know, in our woodworking we have the use of a sundry of different sizes and shapes of router bits to get different kinds of profiles, to do different kinds of jobs, to cut dados, to put decorative edges, to making raised panels, making rail and stiles. There's all kinds of uses that we have, and we're fortunate that we have manufacturers that make us those bits that'll do all that for us so that we can get the most efficiency out of our router table. And they're designed to run at certain speeds. But as a rule, the smaller the bit, the faster it can turn. Here's an example. This is a 1/4 inch straight bit. And the recommended speeds for this is between 22 and 24,000 RPMs. Get a little larger, from 1 inch to 2 inches, and that's in diameter across the bit. From 1 inch to 2 inch in diameter. Speeds can slow down a little bit from 18 to 22,000 RPMs. And then when you start getting into the bigger bits, like here's a 2 1/4 inch raised panel bit. Recommended speeds for that is 12,000 to 6,000 RPMs. And then the bigger raised panel bits. This one is actually 3 1/2 or 3 1/4, but anywhere from 2 1/2 to 3 1/2 can run up to 8,000 to 12,000 RPMs, as we've shown here. You might ask, how do I know how fast I'm turning? Well, you just have to look at your router. Generally, there's a speed adjustment on it. It's a little knob. It'll say 1 to 10. And then you have to look at your hardware, and it'll tell you what the lowest and the highest is, and you just make yourself a little interpolate, just make yourself a little chart as to what, you know, your router, the approximate speeds. And these are approximate recommendations. So I did not create this. This is not my gospel of Lynn Lacey. It's information that's readily available from router makers and router bit makers. So as a rule, slower the bit, the faster it can turn. So that's the scoop on router bit sizes and router bit speeds, recommended router bit speeds. Our next topic is bit rotation. Now that we've got it installed and we know what size we're running, we know about what speed to adjust it at, now let's look at the bit rotation and the feed direction. The bit rotation, as the bit sits in a router table, is always counterclockwise, as indicated by this arrow right here. Always counterclockwise. And our feed direction will always be into that bit. Bit's turning this way, we're feeding this way. Always. You could see what would happen if this bit's turning this way, let's take our fence back out of the way. You can see if you fed it this way, what's going to happen? That bit's going to grab that piece. Bit's rotating, that bit's going to grab that piece and it's going to shoot it across. It's just like kickback on a table saw, maybe not quite as forceful, but the same effect. This bit rotating this way will grab it, and it will want to pull it out, ruining your cut, jeopardizing your safety. So we always cut, we always feed into the counterclockwise side of the bit. Now, if you're using a bit with a bearing on it, just real quick, how do you set that up? Well, that's pretty easy. Basically, you just get yourself a straight edge. I'm just going to use this board, and then you just pull your fence up to where the fence is now in line with your workpiece. Tighten it down, and then you've got the proper amount of router bit to do whatever job it is you were wanting to do. Let's demonstrate some of this. Okay, we've got an overhead view here. Like we said, our fence is lined up with our router bit, and I've got it raised up to give a profile. We're showing our bit direction to be counterclockwise, and we're showing our feed direction to be into. Just got a piece of scrap pine here. Now we have a nice little 1/8 inch round over on that particular one. Now you don't have to use with a bearing. You do not have to use your router table. All you have to do is you have to be real careful about coming into your bit. Don't come into it too far. You want to ease into it from the front side. There's also a spot here for a starter pin. And sometimes if you don't have a table, you can use a starter pin to do this. You can see our same result without a fence. That's particularly the case if you've got an irregular surface shape, which if you noticed in my video last week about the essential oil carousel, I was routing a circle. So, okay, we just established that if you don't have a fence, then we could use the starter pin if you need to. Really, you don't have to. If you noticed, like we said in our video last week, I put a round over on some circles, but again I went into the cutting edge. Bit's turning this way and I went this way, and we'll simulate that again right now. There we go. You can see we've got a nice round over on the outside edge. But what if you wanted to do this inside edge? With the bit turning this way, we would feed it this way. But this is where I saw some guys doing it improperly. They've got the bit turning this way, and they were on the back side of the bit, and they were still trying to feed it that way. So what's going to happen? They were having to fight it because that bit was trying to take their workpiece, and they were trying to struggle with it. If you're going to work off the back side of the bit, what are you going to do? You're going to go this way with it still, because the bit's in rotation this way. although we were on the back side of the bit, we were still rotating into the cutting edge. Just the cutting edge was now back here instead of up here. If the cutting edge is up here, we go this way. If the cutting edge is back here, we went always into the cutting edge. So now see, we've got the round over on the inside and on the outside. Now what if we wanted to do a dado? Let me set up and I'll be right back. Okay, now if we're going to cut a dado, and I cut one here, this is about a 1/2 inch, but let's suppose that you need a 3/4 or a 5/8 inch wide dado, and all you got's a 1/2 inch bit. Well, logic would have it, you make your first cut, and then you just move your fence accordingly to cut it to whatever width you want. But the question is, what's the safe way to move it? Remember what we said about always feeding into the cut edge. Bit is running this way. So we want our cut to be on this front cut edge, which means we would want to widen our dado to this side. You have to think about this when you're laying out all your positions. Now, what would happen if we widened our dado to this side? Well, again, we're cutting on the downhill side, and it's, when I say the downhill side, remember the bit's going this way. So if we're going to cut here to widen it, it's going to want to throw our workpiece towards the camera there. So we would move our fence. We would move our fence to where we would enlarge our dado into the cutting edge. Bit is turning counterclockwise. We want to feed it. That's the same as doing this, but here we're just widening that dado. There we have. So you safely widen your dado to whatever you need, and you still fed into the cutting edge of the bit. Now, conversely, do not, I repeat, do not try this at home. I moved it to where now we're going to be, it's called a climb cut, it's what it's called. We're going to be cutting with it. It may shoot it into the camera here, we'll see. This is not a safe thing to do. I stopped because I could feel the bit wanting to throw that workpiece toward the camera. I didn't want that to happen. But you can definitely feel it when you're feeding on the outside. You can feel the resistance pushing against you. On this side, it was wanting to take it and sling it right towards the camera. So always cut into the cutting edge direction. The last topic for the day is going to be miter gauge tracks. You'll see some router tables that'll have a miter gauge track that'll run like right across here. And it'll be parallel with the router plate. But it's not really what it's for. It's not to be used for a miter gauge. It's basically a hold down to put feather boards to hold your stock. And I've seen people try to use it as a miter gauge, and here, as a track to hold their workpiece. And here's why. If you've got a miter gauge set up right across here, remember it's running parallel here. If you're going to try to use that to run a workpiece across the bit, or run a workpiece, say, parallel with your fence, then your fence has to be 100% lined up with this miter track. Has to be parallel all the way through. Else, you do one of two things. If it's not,
If it's not, say your fence is tilted back like this, then you may ride against the fence early in your feed, but then when you get past your feed, then you've got a gap over here. What's even worse is if your fence isn't 100% parallel with this miter gauge track and it's this way, well, then what happens? Here you're up against the fence, but once you get to this side, then you start getting in a bind and you start risking bad cuts, kickback, your fence moving. So when you see a router table with a miter gauge track, it's not for miter gauge track to be used for a miter gauge. It's to be used for hold downs for feather boards. That's the intent. So be very cautious. I don't even have one. I don't even have one. If I want to clamp down a feather board, I've got a long feather board and I've got an overhang at this end, and I'll just clamp it down and I'll use that as a feather board to hold my workpiece secure. Misconception about miter tracks. A lot of guys don't realize that. They can get you in trouble. Well, thanks for tuning in. I hope that you gained something out of it. Not necessarily a skill builder, but something that'll keep you from getting hurt. Maybe you knew all of this, maybe you didn't. If you picked up one thing that keeps you from getting hurt, it was well worth your time to watch and my time to do it, and I appreciate it. I'll have on my website a 3 or 4 page PDF file for your download on router table basics. That'll be on my reference page on my website. That'll have the 5 points, important points that we talked about today. It'll also have that table where I listed the recommended speeds for the various bit sizes and ranges, as well as a couple of diagrams about bit rotation direction and feed direction. And it's not an all-inclusive documentation of router table basics, but if you look at this and take some notes while you watch this video, you should be able to gain something out of it. So we appreciate it, and again, I hope that something was gained out of it. If you like the video, I ask you to give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and if it's your first time, subscribe to our channel, LLS, I've been calling it. Like, leave a comment, and subscribe. And all of my social media information is down in the description. Website information, Instagram information, Facebook, all that will be in the description below. We appreciate it again, and until next time, be safe.